Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Tonight, we are joined by Olga. So, Olga, first of all, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. So I've been a paralegal since 2001, so pre-licensing era. I was grandfathered in 2008 as a result of the Law Society, as you know, taking over the governance of the paralegal profession in Ontario. And in the beginning of my career, I was predominantly providing legal services in relation to statutory accident benefits. And then after licensing, I transitioned more into civil litigation before the Small Claims Court, residential tenancy law before the Landlord and Tenant Board. And that's predominantly my area of practice. Over the past 6 years, I've been a partnership with Mr. Gobin, and we started out as a paralegal firm, and then almost 3 years ago, he became a lawyer, so we transitioned to a law firm, and as a result of that, he provides legal defense for criminal matters, and I still remain with Small Claims Court civil litigation, and predominantly in civil area, most of my cases were in relation to Repair Storage Liens Act. And then I expanded that practice to breaches of contract, employment law, personal injury in small claims court. And in 2018, I began my part-time career as an instructor at the George Brown College accredited paralegal program. And I continue in teaching there, and I enjoy it tremendously. And perhaps that's going to be my retirement.
Perfect. So, Olga, maybe we can get started. You can tell us a bit. I know you pointed out the repair and storage lien. I know that comes up, in debts and debtors and creditors, and sort of that area of practice, and how it's unique in terms of priority over other if a paralegal doesn't get paid, it's not like we can put on a lien on somebody's property. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that area, because I think it's something that we don't get into much detail in small claims.
Well, majority of the cases in small claims court with respect to Repair Storage Liens Act arise as a result of towing and storage and motor vehicle repairs, predominantly storage and towing. And you may have heard in the news over the last 5-10 years or so, the public outcry is to the outrageous storage or towing fees, and the government's been trying to, curb that. But in essence, when the motor vehicle is towed, either as a result of a breakdown or police impoundment or motor vehicle accident, the towing company either stores it themselves or they bring it to a storage facility. And then the owner and or the driver of the vehicle would have to retrieve their vehicle, and they would have to pay the fees. And quite often there arises a dispute. The owner of the vehicle doesn't agree with the quantum of storage, or if it's a car accident, that dispute kind of transitions into the hands of the motor vehicle insurance company. And for most part, the insurance industry does dispute the daily storage rates and the towing fees, which gives rise to the entire lien issue. So either the body shop, the storage facility, or the towing company, whichever one that has the possession of the vehicle, they have the right, pursuant to the Repair Storage Liens Act, not to release the vehicle until they are paid. But because there's a dispute as to the quantum, then either the owner or their insurance company on behalf of the owner would pay the money into court. And if it's $35,000 or less, that would be small claims court. And they would obtain an initial certificate. They would serve that initial certificate on the party that has possession of the motor vehicle. And for most part, those facilities will release the vehicle because now their interest is secured by virtue of the money that has been paid into the court. Once the vehicle is released, then the lien, the possessory lien, in essence, transfers to the money that's been paid into court. And to ensure that that money stays there until such time as the dispute is adjudicated or resolved, then the storage facility must commence litigation within 90 days of being served with that initial certificate. So there are some preliminary steps that the parties are required to take prior to the plaintiff's claim being issued. Once the plaintiff's claim is issued, then the matter proceeds in the same matter as any other small claims court proceeding. You have your pleadings, you have your settlement conference, and if it's not resolved, then you proceed to trial. And then it will be up to the judge to decide whether or not the quantum or storage days or the quantum of the daily rate or the towing charges are in fact reasonable. And the parties will have an opportunity, as always, to present their legal positions. I think it's a very, interesting area of law. I definitely don't think that it's fully utilized by the paralegal profession. It's not something that's taught usually in the paralegal program. I think maybe because a lot of colleges consider that to be part of the small claims court procedure, but it's a very specific area of law, regardless of where it is adjudicated, be it superior court through the lawyers or small claims court through the small claims paralegals.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting because, just like you said, that you just pay the money into court to release the vehicle. Because, I mean, if you pay it directly to the repair shop, that there's that the whole expression of possession is 9/10 of the law, right? Is once they have your money, you have your car. I mean, then you're gonna have to sue them for essentially overcharging you, and then it's a lot harder to try to recover that back than as you outlined, that you give the money to the courts, force the hand of them to commence litigation. So now you're on the other side playing defense rather than offense. And if you're successful in court, then, you'll get some of that money returned back to you out of the sort of that's paid in there, as opposed to the likelihood of seeing that if it's given directly, to the repair shop or the body shop or whoever, because then you have to then sort of throw good money chasing after lost money, right? So
absolutely,
it's very interesting, and it's not like your typical, as you said, a small claims matter where there is a dispute. Let's say with somebody, construction company at your house didn't complete the job, and you're like, okay, well, give me my money back, and there's that whole litigation there.
Yes, absolutely. And, you point out correctly, we actually, a few years ago, we had a matter where the owner of the vehicle did pay the storage and the towing fees, and then subsequently commenced litigation alleging that the amounts were unreasonable. And on behalf of the storage facility, we were successful in dismissing the plaintiff's claim. And one of the legal arguments that we presented was the settlement estoppel, that by virtue of paying those fees and not exercising the rights under the Repair Storage Liens Act, you, in essence, as the vehicle owner, accepted the fees and paid them.
Yeah, that's interesting. So sometimes you gotta, and that also brings the point for paralegals and self-represented parties, that the importance of not jumping so quickly into things and missing the law or the step there, because as you point out, once you've gone in that route, then the defense is going to say, yeah, you missed that opportunity, and that could be the potential complaint to the law society if it's done by a paralegal, or if it's a self-rep, they've lost the amount of money that they could have otherwise saved had they done things properly.
Absolutely. And I'll be honest with you, that's why, even when I teach my students at George Brown College, and I asked them, I said, well, what area of law are you more interested in? And where do you see yourself providing legal services upon licensing? Quite often I get a reply, well, small claims court. But respectfully, small claims court is not an area of law, right? It's an adjudicative body, and it actually hears a variety of matters. And I'm not a big proponent of jack of all trades and master of none. I prefer that the legal service providers concentrate on, maybe couple, 3 areas of law specifically, and they can become extremely proficient in that area of law, as opposed to dabbling in all within the permitted scope of practice for paralegals.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess one of the other areas you mentioned, I don't know how much, in terms of your breakdown of your practice, was the landlord tenant board, and maybe you can tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about your practice there and the kinds of things that you're doing on, are you on the landlord side or you're on the tenant side, and how that's been. I know it's been kind of a jungle, let's say, of late in navigating things and delays and so forth. So maybe you can kind of give us a little background of what
Sure.
that's like.
So I started the residential tenancy law practice in 2011. Um, Yeah, about 2011. Sorry, I'm dating myself there for a minute. And initially, I only represented tenants, and I enjoyed that particular aspect. And then I decided to see what the other side lives like, and then I switched to landlords only. And then I went back to kind of balancing it out between the two. So I've been back and forth from each side. And over the past couple of years, it's been a healthy balance between landlords and tenants. It has been very challenging as a result of COVID-19. I know the Landlord and Tenant Board has made tremendous strides over the past 12 months to improve their system. Actually, funny you mentioned that today we received a memorandum from the Landlord and Tenant Board giving us an update that they doubled the number of adjudicators. They still have 37 vacancies for which they're interviewing and recruiting, which is very promising. And their online system has been improved. So I'm very optimistic that within a year, the backlog that they're currently experiencing will be cleared up. But it has been challenging. And I think it's been challenging for both sides of the dispute. Where we have tenants who are struggling as a result of the landlord's failure to maintain residential units or perhaps charging illegal amounts. And then the other end of it, we have landlords who have tremendous amounts of rent arrears. And by the time they get to a hearing, it's 8 to 12 months. And they're lucky if it doesn't get adjourned on the day of the hearing. So they continuously incurring these arrears, and they have no financial recourse, ability, to pay for this income property. So it becomes a challenge. And I think both sides in this particular area of law are being, kind of disserviced by the board, but I think there's improvements, and I'm optimistic. I always am. So hopefully that will be resolved soon enough.
Now, of course, Olga, I guess, in the last 5 or so years, right, you were talking about teaching at George Brown, and certainly you've probably seen, sort of every year, right, you have a new group of students coming in, new group going out. And one of the things, and certainly a lot of talk, even from the law society over the last few years, about getting paralegals kind of to succeed in the industry, right? And there's all sorts of different ideas, right, in terms of maybe different practice areas. Certainly we looked at maybe different areas of scope, possibly. But I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to, and certainly I see it from all the students I've had over the same period of time, is that not everyone, and we were just talking about it, not everyone's cut out for running their own practice, but at the same time, it's not traditionally an area where you're seeing a lot of entry level associate kind of positions that are there. So I mean, I know tomorrow actually a lot of people are writing the licensing exam. 6 to 8 weeks or so from now, they're going to get a lot of good results and excitement about, now I'm licensed, I'm ready to jump into the field, got to get a few signatures and do an oath, and then sometime in September, October, they got the, I see the pictures on Instagram and LinkedIn that they got their license on the wall, and they're like, now what's the next step, right? And I know you recently did a 3-part webinar there with Emond, talking about kind of running your own practice. So I mean, I guess maybe we could start there in terms of what have you seen from your students, and any general advice about getting into the profession and building from there. And eventually, again, like you said, not to be a jack of all trades, because then you're a master of none. And then, it's in terms of efficiencies, you're spread too thin to really help your clients and focus on the business aspect of things.
Yes. Well, one of the courses I do teach at George Brown is practice management. And in June, together with Imam Publishing, we were able to put together and present a 3-part CPDs on the topics of operating your own paralegal practice. And in my experience, in chatting with my students and following up with them after they become licensed, not everyone is interested in being self-employed. And I can absolutely relate to that. I don't think self-employment is for everyone. It does take a certain type of a character. It takes a certain level of investment as well. But I think that there's not enough conversation as to the type of employment that's out there. Over the last 12 months, I've set up an Indeed notification for any jobs that come up in this area of paralegals. And what I've noticed is that a lot of job postings, the titles are a little bit misleading. Different businesses, different firms are looking for legal assistants, law clerks, paralegals, and they often use those titles interchangeably. And I think that the new graduates and new licensees, they would be better served if they open their mind to look at various titles of these potential jobs and not worry so much as to the label, I'm a legal assistant, rather look at the tasks at hand and whether or not those tasks are actually within the paralegal realm, so to speak. And I think a starting point, even as a legal assistant, getting your foot in the door, learning from mentors, developing a network, all of that will facilitate a great employment success. Now, for those who wish to become self-employed, the 3-part CPD series, we started with opening a paralegal business and what it means to have a paralegal business, how to register it with the government, with the law society, subject to the business entity structure you select, but more importantly, how to develop a sound business plan. And I think that's one of the challenges that new graduates or new licensees often encounter is, well, like you said, I have my license, now what? But if that business plan is developed and broken down, very detailed, then it will be a tremendous helpful tool and a guide for the paralegal who wishes to be self-employed. It would clearly provide them with the information they need to understand what goals they need to reach as a business owner, as a paralegal. And then in the second series, we start talking about marketing the paralegal business and generating clients. We talked about advertising and how to communicate legal fees. And I see a lot of comments on Facebook, social media posts from new paralegals. They don't know how much to charge. But that financial plan is one of the key elements in determining how much you should charge when you consider your overhead and not just how much you're paying for rent or how much you're paying for your insurance or your paralegal license. Take the education, take the textbooks, take the licensing fees. All of that's your business investment. You've invested in yourself and say, you know what, in 5 years' time, I want to recuperate all that money. So when I ran numbers and I provide a solid plan, a financial plan example in that CPD, we came down to a bare minimum of $150 an hour. And that's about the market rate for starting out paralegals. And that hourly rate then can be translated into block fees, into flat fees, subject to how much time it takes to perform a particular activity. On the third series, we start talking about the different type of fees. What do they mean? How do we gauge if we're charging enough? For example, provincial offenses, I see a lot of paralegals, it's like, $500 for a careless driving defense from start to finish. But what happens if there's a charter issue, right? What happens if there are multiple court appearances? And developing that flat fee often comes down to the paralegal spending exorbitant amount of time and effort and only charging 500 or only charging 600. And by the time you break it down hourly, you're working for minimum wage. So all of that put together, I present in my CPD. Each one of them is 90 minutes, and they are accredited by the Law Society for the professionalism hours. So that's also helpful for paralegals to meet their CPD requirements on an annual basis. But I think that whether it is employment or self-employment that the new licensees are seeking, networking and researching their ideal job or their ideal business outcome in order to facilitate their career planning is imperative.
Now, as we get out of the pandemic of the last few years, where that networking became a little bit different, right? I mean, before you'd have a lot of events, what somebody's putting on a CPD, something in person, and you'd go in and you'd have like the wine and cheese sort of gatherings, exchanges of business cards and talks, and and so forth. But nowadays, I mean, a lot of that's shifted online, and sometimes depending on the community you're in, you're afraid to kind of put yourself out there because some senior member of the profession might say, that's a dumb question, JP. Why are you asking that? And then you're kind of brandished, in that regard. Or sometimes, I mean, and that's pretty unfortunate sometimes, right? Where you see some of that going on, where people are afraid to kind of approach people. Or sometimes it's just the approach is wrong, right? I mean, I could tell you, I have some random messages where it's like, I'm looking for work, period. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, where have you been applying? What kind of areas are you looking for? What would be ideal for you? What have you sort of seen in 5 years from now? But yeah, I mean, in both regards, sometimes again, people don't put themselves out there, or others that they do, and they think that there's going to be this magic solution that's not always there. So I mean, anything that you would share with your students, as they finish practice management and kind of go into the exams and beyond, or anyone that's listening now, about kind of how to network in 2023 compared to some of these straightforward things like, hey, just go to all these things in 2019 and problem solved. What would you share?
Well, I absolutely agree with you. That there's a disconnect as a result of the pandemic. And while I love technology and the convenience of it, there is an element that's missing, and that's that personal connection. I'm grateful that Small Claims Court has returned to in-person trials and debtor examination, so that gets you kind of back into a courtroom and whatnot. I would recommend that newly licensee paralegals or paralegal students, they try to physically attend courtrooms. You still have in-person hearings, and sit there and look and watch and listen, and then approach the paralegal. Introduce yourself. Just say, I'm a student, or I've just graduated and I really enjoyed watching your advocacy. Can I ask you a couple of questions? And I think most paralegals, at least, those that I know, will be absolutely open to that. A couple of weeks ago, I was at an LTB hearing, and subsequently I received a message from a stranger. And she introduced herself to me, and she said, I saw you at the LTB room, and I'm currently dealing with identical type of a issue. Do you have a minute to chat? And absolutely, subject to availability, sure. And I think a lot of paralegals would be open to that. You may come across an odd paralegal or an odd lawyer that's either, if you're busy or not interested, and that's okay. It's not a personal rejection. And I think perhaps one of the advice that I can provide to students is that it's not personal, right? So we do get busy, we forget. Either follow up with them again or pick somebody else. There are plenty of paralegals. Some of them are well seasoned, others, a little bit less, that are open for questions and open for answers.
Now, Olga, you mentioned certainly practicing for 20 odd years before licensing and after licensing. I mean, maybe what can you share? for the students, or again, the newly licensed, in terms of that progression, in terms of, you've seen the development of the paralegal profession here. I mean, we're still, as of today, the only place where you can become licensed and fully practicing. I know, if somebody is watching this 6 months from now, it may be different. I think BC is pretty close to getting there as well, and maybe Alberta. But what can you sort of see in that trend, in terms of development of paralegals, and the fact that you mentioned small claims court, where maybe in 2001, when you were going there, I think that it might have been like $5,000,
Right.
but other than the 7 times increase in the amount you can do, there's probably more practitioners, in that you see as paralegals, as opposed to before, where there might be mostly lawyers or self-represented parties.
Well, I think, as a result of the regulation of the Law Society, I think the standard of our profession has drastically improved. And this is not to shed, any negativity on my colleagues pre-licensing, not at all. But I think, as in general, our code of ethics has improved, our behavior has improved, and I think our advocacy has improved. And as you mentioned, even the mere fact that the monetary jurisdiction of the small claims court has increased so drastically over the years, this standard has been risen. And there are more lawyers coming into the small claims court on behalf of their clients. So deputy judges, in my experience, have raised the bar for paralegals, because I now have to go and litigate a small claims court matter that is $35,000. There's a potential defendant's claim for another $35,000. I'm holding $70,000 dispute in my hands on behalf of my client, and I'm up against a seasoned lawyer. So, bluntly put, I better bring my game, right? So I think that's a tremendous benefit to the public. Everybody talks about access to justice, and I think that's part of the access to justice, to be honest with you, is to ensure that we have competent, ethical, responsible representation. And that includes sometimes telling our clients, this is not worth pursuing to trial, because the cost of litigation sometimes is prohibitive. I think that the mandatory requirement of the continued professional development also sets the bar for the profession. And all of that put together just makes the profession better. And as a result of that, over the years, I believe we've, as a profession in totality, have developed more trust with the public. They know who, what, and why paralegal profession is better today than they did 10, 15 years ago. And there's a better trust with it. And you're right, we are I believe in North America, we're the only jurisdiction where paralegals have, and I know it's not very popular in my community to say that, but we actually have a very big scope of practice, if you come to think of that. I think everybody thinks, paralegal, small claims court, landlord and tenant board, provincial offenses. But you and I were chatting just before this interview, and there are so many untapped areas of law within our scope. Either paralegals are not too familiar with it, or they don't know. But I think we have a tremendous opportunity in Ontario to provide those services without the necessity of expanding our scope. And I'm not for or against the expansion of our scope. That's besides the point. But with the current scope that we have, we can provide tremendous benefit to access to justice, tremendous benefits to the members of the public by providing competent representation.
Now, Olga, we were talking earlier there about, sort of, and that kind of relates to that point there of, where do you go in terms of, you go to mentors, you get some proficiency in, in one or two or three areas of law, or one or two or three different tribunals, or however you kind of find that. But in terms of getting started, I mean, anything that, you found from over the years in your different sort of firms there, in terms of, biggest mistakes that you see newly licensed or even experienced paralegals, when they do go out on their own, that they make in getting sort of set up, that then takes a longer time to sort of develop, because you didn't account for some of those things in starting and building your practice?
I think what I've seen over the years is that paralegals, once they get licensed or once they decide to move from employment to self-employment, they get excited about an idea, and rightfully so. I've been self-employed for over 20 years. I personally love it, but it's the lack of planning. And what happens, from what I've seen, is that they jump into self-employment, and all of a sudden they find themselves treading water in that they have to be a paralegal and they have to be a business owner all at the same time. And it becomes overwhelming. And you're spending your 9 to 5, let's say 40 hours a week being a paralegal. And then you also have to spend, 10, 15 hours, whatever amount of time promoting your business, adhering to the various administrative requirements between the government, between the law society. And all of a sudden you find yourself burnt out because you don't have that healthy life and work balance. You're spending 60, 70 hours in front of your computer. And you look around and say, well, wait a minute, why am I doing this? And they get disillusioned. And unfortunately, and some of them leave the profession in entirety. Others return to employment, perhaps, and that's unfortunate. So planning. If you can, save up some money, give yourself a month, maybe 2 months between employment and self-employment to properly prepare, to properly plan, to make those connections, so that you can have a go-to mentor. And I know the Law Society of Ontario provides an opportunity for mentorship and coaching. They have a program where lawyers and paralegals volunteer. Reach out to them. They also have a practice management hotline, and I think you can make an appointment online now. Reach out to them. There are a lot of resources all around. You just need to tap into them.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and it's great because, like I was saying, I was just talking to, a colleague of yours right before this, and a lot of the same thing about mentorship. And again, it's not like about reinventing the wheel. You have all of these resources that are there for you. I mean, CPDs, things like that as well, that will give you that guidance. And again, if you if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail, right? So I think sometimes you put the cart before the horse, and you think, hey, I'm going to do this and this, and then when it comes time to actually doing it, you realize there's a lot of time in there. And as you point out, I mean, it's like two jobs at once, right? Because there's the stuff that you may have that experience in practice, but then it's the whole other, well, I need to get clients, and I need to get my accounts in order and my trust accounts, and I then need to make sure I've communicated with the client about some of the getting them in for the retainer and things like that I didn't have to think of as an employee, where I just would go in and appear before whatever tribunal or court. I mean, any other tips there in terms of getting that sort of plan, into before you put it into fruition, kind of developing it? And I know, in terms of practice management at school, I mean, I don't know, depending on the program, there's usually like a business plan type of assignment. And I always would tell students, pretend this is like your actual plan. Maybe it's not for a year from now, maybe it's 5 years from now, but maybe you look back, if there's one thing you've done in this program that could be very hands-on in your future, is like, what if this is going to be that thing a year from now, or 2 years or 5 years from now, that you're going to actually implement? And the more you put thought into it now, the less you're going to have to do in the future.
I agree with you. In my practice management, George Brown College, the business plan assignment in that course is very heavily weighted against the total mark. And it's a very, very extensive assignment. Students usually, have about, 10, 12 weeks to complete it from start to finish. And I ask them to do, when they're preparing that assignment, to ensure that they have at least one employee, to make sure that they're paying rent, even if they're working from the comfort of their home, allocate part of your rent or part of your mortgage towards that business expense. As you said, it has to be as realistic as possible. And I think that exercise provides two benefits. One, for potential self-employment. But two, even for those paralegals that never want to be self-employed, it's not their thing, at the conclusion of that assignment, I think they have a better understanding and appreciation of what their future employer has to consider. And what I usually tell students who are adamant that they're going to be employed as opposed to self-employed is that you have to consider the benefit that you are bringing to the table to your prospective employer. So when I interview staff or even, field placement students, I ask them, tell me why you. And a lot of people take it as like, well, that's kind of selfish. And I said, well, no, as a business owner, as an employer, I'm more than happy to hire you and pay you, what I believe the position deserves. But the question is, why you? How are you going to benefit me? Because I can rhyme you off a list of benefits that I, as an employer, will deliver to you as my employee. And it has to be a mutual benefit. So I think that newly licensed paralegals need to take a step back and says, okay, what do I know? What did I enjoy in my program? What did I excel at in my program? Should I read up on that more? How can I benefit my future employer? How can I benefit that business? And what do I bring to the table to stand apart from everybody else? For self-employment, what I usually suggest to my students is that let's start from the end. If you had a perfect business, and if I had a magic wand to make it happen, what does that perfect business look like? And once you have that clear picture in your mind, let's start working backwards. What must we do to make that into reality? So, we go backwards. Okay, perfect business, and I'm making $100,000 a year, just throwing numbers in the air. How do I do that? What type of fees? And in order to have that, how many clients I need and so forth. And once we reach the beginning, then we said, okay, let's take a step back, refresh our view, and we now use the same exercise, but from the beginning to the end. To all of these steps, do they bring us to that perfect business conclusion that we first imagined? And if not, we need to adjust something and so forth. So again, we're back to planning, extensive planning. But ultimately, I think it will be success. But one thing I do want to mention is that being self-employed, especially in the paralegal industry, I don't think it's a matter of I have my business plan and it never changes. It has to be fluid. You have to be flexible to adjust to what's happening. COVID-19, I think, is the perfect example to that. We're all used to going to courts and tribunals and so forth, and all of a sudden it all stops. There's a massive pause, and now we're mostly online. So how can I pivot my business in order to generate more money? Great, I'm saving my client a lot of money by not physically going to court, but that also means that I'm not making as much money. What else can I do? How can I advertise? We can go and shake hands and talk to our clients in person. Let's take a look at social media, how we can capitalize on everyone sitting at home on their phones and their laptops, right, in order to promote ourselves.
Yeah, and again, we were talking about sort of self-employment. It's not for everybody, right? And then sometimes people kind of get pushed into that direction. Like, they're like, I went through, a 1 year, 2 year, 4 year program. I think in some places, I went and I wrote the licensing exam. I came, I want to get into law, and certainly I'm not ready to go 3-4 years more to law school and the cost for that. And I'm not finding, or anything I may find that, as you point out, it may not necessarily pay the bills, right? Like I'm like, I have students that are like, well, why would I leave my construction job that's paying, $95,000 a year to take this entry level position, and or they don't want to give the time for things to organically grow.
Mhm.
And then they go into, okay, well, what if I just start my own practice, right? And then, as you point out, there's not enough planning. They're just like, okay, well,
Mhm.
I have somebody's interested in hiring me. I'll take them on as a client, and then I'll kind of figure out as it goes along. And then next thing you know, they realize that, well, that's also not going to pay the bills. And I guess maybe the harder lesson is you're not getting anything coming in consistently, right? So
Mhm.
you might have a few big clients at the beginning, and then, again, you still have to do the work, right? Just because it may be sitting in your trust account, it doesn't mean it's there so you can go pay your mortgage or, your $400 grocery bill these days, right? So
Yes.
what in terms of advice of kind of, if you're going to make that decision to and you pointed out certainly keeping a couple of months there to
Mhm.
transition, but what else in terms of, now this is what you want to do? You've got a plan, and again, you don't want to be rigid, right? You got to adapt to changes, but in terms of that inconsistent income coming in, how do you better plan for things like that?
I would say breaking down your ultimate goal. So if let's throw some numbers together. If I tell you that I need to make $100,000 a year, and that sounds like a lot, but if we break it down to, let's say, 50 weeks, because after all, I want to go on vacation, right? Hopefully, that's $2,000 a week I have to make. Now, if we take 5 days a week as a working week, sorry, that's $400 a day. So every day, I, as a paralegal, must generate $400 a day. And I think there's also a bit of a confusion as to the number of hours people work versus billable hours in the legal profession. And I don't have to tell you, but the average is that for every 3 working hours, you bill for 1. So it's a 3-to-1 ratio. If you can make it 2 working hours, and you bill for 1, that's fantastic. If for every hour you work physically, you bill for 1 hour, I want to learn from you, that's for sure. So it's a 3-to-1 ratio. And when we talk about it, 8 hours per day, we know we're not billing for 8 hours a day. So hopefully we're billing for 3 hours. So now that $400 a day that I want to make means I have to bill $133 minimum for minimum of 3 hours. When you break down that massive goal of $100,000 a year into smaller increments, it is attainable. And then you have to be disciplined. It's easy when you're self-employed, especially working from home. Oh, you know what? My laundry needs to get done. Oh, wait, the dog is barking. I'm going to go take the dog for a walk or whatever the case might be. Oh, I got to vacuum. I don't know if you suffer from that. I usually do. But it's the discipline of still working that 9 to 5 hours and making sure that I am billing the $400 a day. And if I, for whatever reason, don't bill enough today, that means that shortfall is going to go to tomorrow. And so long as I stay consistent, as you mentioned, I'm going to achieve my $100,000 a year salary, which covers my expenses, whatever the case. And I think another pitfall that a lot of self-employed paralegals usually make when they create these financial plans, they consider their overhead, their annual fees, and all of the lovely expenses. What they don't consider is themselves. Regardless of the legal entity that paralegals set up to be self-employed, sole proprietorships, partnerships, professional corporations, I always provide advice that treat yourself as an expense. You should not be drawing from the profit. Treat yourself as an expense in order to determine how much money you have to bill, how much money you have to make. Because outside of our paralegal business, we still have our personal bills. And how much to pay ourselves? Well, then consider how much your personal life requires you to make if you were employed. Is it $60,000 a year? Is it, $70,000 a year? Whatever that magic number is, you include that in your financial planning for your paralegal business.
Yeah, certainly, because then you at least have consistency, right? I mean, and again, the opposite, in terms of discipline, was that, what happens when, you have a bunch of clients coming in and, you're doing a bunch of work and you're like, oh, I'm going to go to Florida or California or Hawaii now because I just made, instead of that 3 billable hours a day, I made 10, right? Like it's a really big 3-day stretch. And then there's going to be those days where you're right, where it won't be 3 hours, it'll be 1 hour, it'll be 2 hours, and then they balance out. And if you're kind of spending when you're making so much on one end, well, then then you're going to be drawing blanks when there's nothing coming in. So I mean, again, that consistency, as you point out, of paying yourself as an expense, then at least you're not worrying so much about the fluctuations.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned when somebody goes, well, why should I give up my full-time construction job, making so much a year, and then start from the bottom in the paralegal industry? But surely that construction job didn't start off making you what you're making today. You had to start from somewhere from the beginning. You had to get your foot in the door and establish yourself. And in the legal profession, what do we have? We have our knowledge, our skill sets, and it takes time to develop the reputation of competent legal professionals. It takes time to get the community around you to get to know you. So absolutely, plan, and don't get discouraged.
Now, in terms of practice management, another thing that comes up is certainly getting some of the tools, and I know everyone has their own preference of software they like to use, and bringing in bookkeeping and accounting and people like that. As you said, plan to have at least one employee. Is there kind of when you're planning, or maybe not planning, I guess, when it comes up more, where you kind of don't consider sort of that time is money piece, right? Is that, well, hey, I'm just going to do everything myself, so then it'll cost less. But then suddenly you're 3 hours of work to 1 billable. That increases because now you add another hour of bookkeeping work a day that's not going to work. How do you kind of advise people of it's okay to pull back on certain things and pass those responsibilities, whether to a internship student, another paralegal, an accountant, a bookkeeper, whoever, a digital marketing specialist? How do you kind of make those decisions and better understand you're not supposed to do everything in your firm?
Well, I think that the best example I can give you is this. I know how to cook. I'm not a good cook, but I know how. So I have a choice. I can either make a meal myself and it's edible, but it's not delicious, or I can trust a great chef at a great restaurant and I will enjoy it. Yes, I will pay for it, but I will enjoy it. And as a result of that enjoyment, I myself will be a better person, and then I will be more productive. So I kind of try to approach it from that perspective. You're absolutely right. We don't need to do everything in our business. And if you're great with bookkeeping and you understand it and it's quick for you, by all means, do it yourself. But if it's not your favorite area of business management, hand it over to somebody else. Many years ago, I had a colleague who expressed an opinion that administrative staff are only an expense. My point of view is my administrative staff are a great asset, not an expense. If the administrative assistant or law clerk doesn't generate money directly for your business, they are freeing up your time that you can concentrate your knowledge and your efforts on being a paralegal, as you mentioned. And that, I think, goes across the board, be it marketing, be it bookkeeping, be it office cleaning, and so forth. I'm a great cleaner, but I have a wonderful cleaning lady that comes into my office, because the 4 hours that it takes her to clean my office, I can make more money as a paralegal than I'm paying her. So it's counterproductive for me to have my fingers in every cookie jar, so to speak, right? I'd rather concentrate on what I do best and then leave the professionals to do what they do best. In the long run, even though initially it's like, well, I don't want to have an extra expense, I'm trying to be conservative and save money. But in the long run, those professionals will probably do a better job than you and will provide you a greater financial result. Not to mention eliminate the frustration that comes along with doing a task in which you're not proficient in.
Now, continue on this, and I think again we talked about the jack of all trades, sort of master of none before, and again in talking with others in the profession, pointing out that, well, it kind of leads to the race to the bottom, so to speak, where everyone's like, oh, well, I can do this for $50, and then you're just like, the only thing worse than having no clients is having clients that you're making like little to no money on. And as you point out, it's the same thing. Instead of doing having someone else do your bookkeeping and you're focused on areas where you're generating income, you're now doing all this other legal work and you're charging very little. And then now someone else might be walking in ready to hand you, $200 an hour. And you're like, oh, I can't do that because I'm so busy with all these other things.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of resist the urge to one, set your value so low that it's counterproductive, especially when you're kind of starting out and you're like, oh, I just need to take anything to get going. And then two, as you point out, well, maybe you're doing small claims and landlord tenant and, something, a provincial offenses matter kind of walks into your office or calls in and you're like, oh, I could maybe do that. But no, the answer should be no, because now you don't know. I mean, aside from, the law society competence requirements and things like that, I mean, you just don't know how to do it. Right. And why take that on when you can be focused on the things that you're good at. So how do you kind of resist that urge on both fronts there? And anything you can share for newly licensed of why that's, a recipe for potential disaster?
It is absolutely a recipe for disaster. And you're right. The learning curve that's involved in taking matters in which you're not too knowledgeable in is tremendous. I know this much about provincial offenses, and I personally would never take on a matter with such little knowledge. If I take time out of my practice and out of teaching and bring myself up to speed and get comfortable in that area of law, then sure. But so not only is it a disservice to yourself, it's definitely a disservice to the client. And taking on anything that walks through your door, in my opinion, it's unethical. I think it's unprofessional. And in the long run, you may develop a reputation among your clients and among your colleagues that you really don't have a high standard of competency because you kind of, as you mentioned, you're jack of all trades and master of none. I would recommend concentrating on a particular area of law, become proficient in that, build that reputation, and then you will confidently demand the hourly rate that you deserve. It's not just the years of experience. I have seen paralegals 2-3 years charging $250 because they are very, very proficient in a particular area of law. And then there's those that perhaps not so much, and perhaps their overhead is very minimal, so they can afford to charge less. And I think for every type of a professional or every type of a product, there's always somebody who can do it cheaper, not necessarily better, having said that. And we often get clients inquiring about fees. Some of them have no issues with those fees, and others will say, well, I was talking to a paralegal and they can do a small claims court action from start to finish for $750. And I encourage those type of clients to go and retain that paralegal. Absolutely. What that also tells me is that the client themselves does not value their dispute greatly. And if to the client, their small claims court action is only worth $750 worth of legal fees, then by all means, maybe they're not interested in litigating, right? And I'm not really interested in, kind of being just enough. So it's difficult, and I can appreciate that new business owners in the paralegal profession, they want to generate that money, they want to generate those clients, but I just want to remind them that it's their confidence that's going to be driving those clients to their door. It's their knowledge, and I don't like using the word expertise, but for the sake of this conversation, right? So it's their expertise in a particular area of law that's going to drive that client to them. When clients talk to you and they say, wow, you know so much about this area of law, I want to hire you. They don't even often ask how much you charge, because they don't care. All they heard is the knowledge and the experience and the confidence in that particular type of circumstances.
Perfect. So Olga, I thank you so much for taking the time here and joining us, and just realized the hour just kind of flew by. So any final words of wisdom again for, we've shared a lot of discussion there for, in particular, newly licensed and students that are just getting into the profession and making that decision of looking for employment or potentially looking at self-employment, and the things to avoid and the things to sort of to focus on, getting mentorship and so forth. Any final words of wisdom
Sure.
for anyone listening?
Well, I think if the paralegals are looking for employment, consider including a sample of your writing, perhaps a phenomenal assignment from your paralegal studies. Include that with your resume. Demonstrate to that potential employer how great you are in legal drafting. You can demonstrate your understanding of legal issues and so forth. And for self-employment, plan, and definitely network. And like I said, there are plenty of paralegals out there who are more than happy to spend some time either in person or by Zoom or by telephone and kind of guide you. And if all of that fails, take a look at the Law Society mentorship program, coaching program. I've heard some terrific feedback from my former paralegal students that helps them. Looking for employment, keep your mind open to positions that don't specifically have the words paralegal in the title. Take a look at what the employer is seeking. Determine how your legal education and your placement experience can benefit that employer, and tell that employer why you're so eager to join their company. I want to thank you, JP, for giving me the opportunity. I was a fan of your series throughout the venture election. It was very informative, so it's a privilege to be on your show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olga. And I think I would be amiss, if Laura was like, hey, make sure you mention about the 3-part CPD series. So I don't know if you have, I know obviously you can go to Emon, but anything to direct anyone listening at this point of where they can find that information?
Oh, absolutely. So Emon Publishing, it's emon.ca, and you can select the option of their CPDs, the Continuing Professional Development Series, and you'll find the title Operating a Paralegal Firm. It is a 3-part series, and you can purchase all 3 episodes, or you can purchase them separate. One of the great things that, if I may say so myself, about these series is that there are a lot of samples and handouts over and above the PowerPoint presentation. So you can utilize those samples for your own practice. And see what you find helpful. Perhaps just one particular episode that really is going to make the difference between great planning and maybe, not so great planning for your business. But absolutely take a look. And for many paralegals, it could be a refresher or you may learn something new. So by all means, iman.ca and their CPD programs. Thank you.
Thanks so much again, Olga, for joining us. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. All the best. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.